Alright, so I'm going to be reading some chapters out of this book here, Secret Life of Plants. And the reason for it is some of the information you can't unknow, and I've had experiences with plants that kind of opened my eyes to truths about them that haven't ever been explained in any science class I've ever been in. And when I'm growing the plants and I'm creating different systems and methods, I'm taking into account a lot of this type of information. The plants, as far as I'm concerned, are alive, and I want to treat them with the respect that they need. And they actually go into, how the plants feel about that in this book, which is amazing. Like I said, it's stuff you can't unknow. If you have an opportunity, there is a short documentary on YouTube called Plants Can Speak and Water Has Memory. And if you can, check out some of the chapters. Like I said, it's information you can't unknow. I hope. All right, this is Secret Life of Plants, Chapter 6, Plant Life Magnified 100 Times. I'll get right into it. And again, like I said, these are the things that are in my head when I'm dealing with the understanding that I have that I'm trying to replicate for the garden. So, I hope. On the east coast of the subcontinent of India, in the old state of Bengal, there stands on 4 acres of ground off of the Acharya Prafula Chandra Road north of Calcutta University, a complex of buildings made of fine grayish and purple sandstone in the classical design of pre-Mohammedan India. The main edifice, known as the Indian Temple of Science, bears an inscription. This temple is dedicated to the feet of God for bringing honor to India and happiness to the world. Just inside the entrance are glass cases containing a series of intriguing instruments devised more than 50 years ago to measure the growth and behavior of plants down to their minutest detail. By magnification, these processes up to 100 million times. The instruments stand in their cases, a mute testimony to the geniuses of great Bengali scientists who worked united in one-man fields of physics, physiology, and psychology, and who found out more about plants than anyone before and perhaps after him, but who remains almost unmentioned in classical histories of subjects in which he specialized. The buildings and the gardens are Institute of Research built by Sir Jagadish Chandra Bose, of whose work in the field plant physiology the Encyclopedia Britannica could only say nearly half a century after his death that it was so much in advance of his time it could not be precisely evaluated. When Bose was still a child, his father had already painfully discerned in 1852 the main impact of British education system on Indian children. The imposition of a slavish and monotonous imitation of all things Western, and the requirement to learn by rote. The senior Bose therefore sent his son to a simple village, Pathasala, rather than a colonial primary school. At the age of 4, the boy was carried to his classroom on the shoulders of a reformed gang robber or dacoit who could find employment after a long jail term with no one but Bose's father. From his dacoit, the boy absorbed stories of savage battles and adventurous escapades, but was also exposed to natural goodness of a man who had been befriended after being rejected by society as a criminal. No nurse, Bose wrote in his later life, could have been kinder than his leader of lawless men. Though he scoffed at the judicial strictures of society, he had the deepest veneration for natural moral law. Bose's early contacts with the peasantry also were crucial to his own appreciation of the world. Much later, he told an academic gathering, it was for those who till the ground and make the land blossom with green verdure, from the sons of fisher folk who told stories of strange creatures that frequented the depths of mighty rivers, of the stagnant pools, and of stagnant pools, that I first derived a lesson of that which constituted true manhood. From them, too, I drew my love of nature. When Bose graduated from St. Xavier College, his brilliant teacher, Father Lafont, was so impressed by the young man's aptitude in physics and mathematics that he wanted him to go to England and read for the civil service examinations. Bose's father, who had personally experienced the deadening nature of that profession, advised his son to become not an administrator but a scholar, with the prospect of ruling nobody but himself. At Christ College, Bose taught physics, chemistry, botanical sciences by such by such luminaries as Lord Rayleigh, discoverer of argon in the air, and Francis Darwin, son of the evolutionary theorist. Having passed his triple examinations, Bose went on to take a bachelor's degree in science the following year at London University. But when Bose was appointed professor of physics at Calcutta Presidency College, reputedly the best in India, the appointment was protested by the college's principal and the director of Bengal's public instruction, who maintained the all too usual view that no Indian was competent to teach science. To get back at Bose for being recommended over their heads by a letter from the Postmaster General to the Viceroy, they offered him a special appointment at a salary only half that of the English professors and gave him no facilities to carry on research. In protest, Bose refused to touch his monthly salary check for 3 years, which obliged him to live in bitter deprivation, the more so as his father had fallen heavily into debt. That Bose was brilliant as a teacher was attested by the fact that no roll call had to be instituted in his classroom, which was always packed to the walls. Bowing to his obvious talents, the authorities who had snubbed him finally gave him a position at full pay. Although Bose had no resources other than his own salary, a 20 square foot room to serve as a laboratory, and an illiterate tinsmith, whom he trained as his mechanic, he began work in 1894 to see if he could improve the instruments recently devised by Heinrich Rudolf Hertz to transmit Hertzian or radio waves through the air. Hertz, who died that same year at premature age of 37, had started the world of physics by fulfilling his laboratory the prediction of Scottish physicist James Clerk Maxwell nearly 20 years before, that waves of any electrical disturbance in the ether, the variety and scope of which was far from known, would, like those of visible light, be reflective, refractable, and polarizable. While Marconi in Bologna was still trying to transmit electric signals through space without wires, a race was to win officially against similar efforts by Lodge in England, Muirhead in the United States, and Popov in Russia. Bose had already succeeded. In 1895, the year before Marconi's patent was issued, at a meeting in Calcutta Town Hall, presided over by Sir Alexander Mackenzie, the Lieutenant Governor of Bengal, Bose transmitted electric waves from the lecture hall through intervening walls in Mackenzie's portly body to a room 75 feet away, where they tripped a relay which threw a heavy iron ball, fired off a pistol, and blew up a small mine. Bose's accomplishments now began to attract the attention of the British Royal Society, equivalent of the Academy of Sciences in other countries, which, at Lord Raleigh's behest, invited Bose to publish a paper in its proceedings on determination of wavelength of electric radiation, and offered him a subsidy at its parliamentary grant for advancement of science. This was followed by Bose's being awarded a doctorate of science by London University. The Electrician, leading journal in its field, came forward to suggest that at the basis of Bose's works, it might now become practical to place electromagnetic transmitters in lighthouses and receivers on ships to offer mariners a third eye capable of penetrating fog. In England, Bose gave a lecture on his apparatus for investigating electromagnetic waves before a meeting of British Association for the Advancement of Science in Liverpool, which so impressed Lord Kelvin that he limped up to the ladies' gallery to congratulate Bose's beautiful wife in the most glowing terms on her husband's brilliant work. The triumph was followed in January 1897 by an invitation to address the Royal Institution at one of its Friday evening discourses, which, since the Institute's establishment, had become the principal venue for announcements of fresh and momentous investigations and discoveries. Of Bose's address, the Times wrote, the originality of the achievement is enhanced by the fact that Dr. Bose had to do the work in addition to his incessant duties with apparatus and appliances which in this country would be deemed altogether inadequate. The Spectator, echoing This accolade announced, "There's something of rare interest in the spectacle of a Bengali of the purest descent lecturing in London to an audience of appreciative European savants upon one of the most recondite branches of modern physical science." Back in India, Bose was buoyed to find that a communication signed by Lord Lister, President of the Royal Society, and by other scientific luminaries had been sent to the Secretary of State for India, recommending that the Center for Research and Advancement teachings in physics worthy of that great empire be established under Bose's direction at Presidency College. Despite this recommendation, an immediate grant for the imperial government of $40,000 something dollars, I guess, to set up the center forthwith, mean-minded, jealous functionaries in Bengal Education Department succeeded in so tying up the project that it never came to fruition. Only the gestures of his fellow Bengali and poet Rabindranath Tagore, later to win the Nobel Prize for Literature, alleviated Bose's disappointment. Tagore came especially to greet him, not finding him at home, left a huge magnolia blossom in token of his tribute. Doggedly pursuing his research whenever the press of his teaching duties in the backbiting climate of the college offered him a spare moment, Bose published in 1898 4 papers on the behavior of electric waves in the Proceedings of the Royal Society and in Great Britain's foremost popular scientific journal, Nature. In 1899, Bose noticed the strange fact that his metallic coherer for the receiving radio became less sensitive if continually used, but returned to normal after a period of rest. This led him to a conclusion that metals, however inconceivably, might exhibit a recovery fatigue similar to that which took place in tired animals and people. Further work began to convince Bose that the boundary line between so-called non-living metals and living organisms was tenuous indeed. Spontaneously moving from the domain of physics into that of physiology, Bose began a comparative study of curves of molecular reaction in inorganic substances and those in living tissue. To his awe and surprise, curves produce a slightly warmed magnetic oxide of iron showing striking resemblance to those of muscles. In both, response and recovery diminished with exertion and with consequent fatigue, and the consequent fatigue could be removed by gentle massage or by exposure to a bath of warm water. Other metal components reacted in animal-like ways. A metal surface etched with acid when polished to remove all trace of the etching exhibited reactions in its acid-treated sections which could not be elicited in those non-treated. Both ascribed to the affected sections some kind of lingering memory of the treatment. In potassium, he found that the power of recovery was almost totally lost if it was treated with various foreign substances. This seemed to parallel the reactions of muscular tissue to poisons. In a presentation to the International Congress of Physics held in 1900 at the Paris exhibition entitled De la Generalité des Phénomènes Moléculaires Produits par Électricité sur le something. Both stressed the fundamental unity among the apparent diversity of nature, concluding that it is difficult to draw a line and say that here the physical phenomenon ends and here the physiological begins. The Congress was bouleversed by Bose's earth-shaking suggestion that the gulf between animate and inanimate might not be as broad and unspannable as generally believed. Its secretary declared himself stunned. The enthusiasm of his fellow physicists was, however, not matched by the coterie of physiologists who were invited the following September to a meeting in the physics section of a British Association for Advancement of Science at Bradford. Because Bose's research overlapped into territory which they considered their private preserve, the physiologists listened with hostile silence while Bose read a paper contending that Hertzian waves could be used as a stimulating agent in tissues and that metal response was analogous to that of tissues. To meet the physiologists on their ground, Bose meticulously adapted his experiment to an accepted electromotive variation, to which they were accustomed. and again got similar curves of muscles and metals responding to the effects of fatigue or of stimulating, depressing, and poisoning drugs. Shortly thereafter, it dawned on Bose that if the striking continuity between such extremes as metals and animal life are real, he should also be able to get similar effects in ordinary vegetable plants, which, because they were held to have no nervous system, were universally reckoned as unresponsive. Picking several horse chestnut leaves from a tree in the garden next to his lab, Bose found that they responded to various blows in much the same way as his metals and muscles. Excited by the results, he betook himself to his greengrocer and purchased a bag of carrots, turnips, which of all vegetables appeared the most stolidly non-sentient, and found them to be highly sensitive. When he chloroformed the plants, Bose discovered that they were successfully anesthetized as animals, and that when the narcotic vapor was blown away by fresh air like animals, they revived. Using chloroform to tranquilize a huge pine tree, Bose was able to uproot it and transplant it without the usually fatal shock of such operations. When Sir Michael Foster, Secretary of the Royal Society, came to Bose's laboratory one morning to see for himself what was happening, and Bose showed the Cambridge veteran some of his recordings, the older man said jocularly, come now, Bose, what is the novelty of this curve? We have known for it for at least a half a century. He goes, but what do you think it is? Bose persisted quietly. Why, a curve of muscle response, of course, said Foster testily. Looking at the professor from the depths of his haunting brown eyes, Bose said firmly, pardon me, but it is the response of metallic tin. Foster was aghast. What? He shouted, jumping from his chair. Tin? Did you say tin? When Bose showed him all his results, Foster was thrilled as he was astounded. It was as thrilled as he was astounded. On the spot, he invited Bose to give an account of his discoveries at another Friday evening discourse in the Royal Institution, and offered to communicate his paper personally to the Royal Society in order to secure his priority. At the evening of May 10, 1901, Bose marshaled all the results obtained over 4 years and demonstrated each one of them with comprehensive series of experiments before ending with peroration. I have shown you this evening autographic records of the history of stress and strain in the living and non-living. How similar are the writings? So similar indeed that you cannot tell one apart from the other. Among such phenomena, how can we draw a line of demarcation and say here the physical ends and the physiological begins? Such absolute barriers do not exist. It was when I came upon the mute witness of these self-made records and perceived in them one phase of a pervading unity that bears within it all things. The quote that quivers in ripples of light, the teeming life upon our earth and radiant suns that shine above us. It is then that I understood for the first time a little of that message proclaimed my ancestors on the banks of the Ganges 30 centuries ago. They who see but one in all changing manifoldness of the universe, unto them belongs eternal truth, unto none else, unto none else. Bose's lecture was warmly received, and to his surprise, his views went unchallenged despite the metaphysical note at its end. Sir William Crookes even urged that the last quotation not be omitted when the address was published. Sir Robert Austin, one of the world's authorities on metals, praised Bose for his faultless argument, saying, I have all my life studied the properties of metals and am so happy to think that they have life. He confessed confidentially that he had formed a similar opinion, but had been rebuffed when he had once hesitantly hinted at it before the Royal Institution. A month later, when Bose repeated his lecture and demonstrations before the Royal Society, he received an unexpected blow from the grand old man of physiological science in England, Sir John Burdon Sanderson, whose principal work had been a study of muscle behavior and the movements of the Venus flytrap, to which Darwin had first called his attention. As Burdon Sanderson was the authority on electrophysiology, all turned to him to open the discussion which followed Bose's speech. Burdon Sanderson began by complimenting Bose on his complimenting Bose on his acknowledged work in physics, but followed with the remark that it was a great pity that he had wandered from his own field of study to areas which belonged properly to the physiologist. Since Bose's paper was still under consideration for publication, he suggested that the title be changed from "Electrical Response in" to "Certain Physical Reactions in," thus leaving the physiologist the term "response," with which physicists should not be concerned. As for the electrical response of ordinary plants, which Bose had described at the end of his address, Burton Sanderson denied categorically that such were possible, since he himself had tried for many years past to obtain them and never succeeded. In his reply, Bose said candidly that he understood the facts experimentally demonstrated were not questioned by his critic. If therefore he was not impugned on the basis of this evidence, but was being asked to make modifications which altered the whole purpose and meaning of his presentation on the basis of authority alone, he would have to decline. It seemed to Bose inexplicable. He said that any doctrine could be advocated before Royal Society, which suggested that knowledge could not advance beyond known bounds. Unless he was shown on scientific grounds where his experiments were faulty or defective, he would insist his paper be published as he had written it. At the end of his rebuttal, when no one rose to break the icy silence which hung over the hall, the meeting was adjourned. Because of doubt thrown on his work by so eminent an expert as Burton Sanderson, and put down a younger man who had so outspokenly challenged his senior, the society voted to follow up Bose's preliminary notice with the full publication of his paper in its proceedings, and instead buried it in its archives, a fate which had fallen other notable papers in the past. To Bose, who all his life had listened to the Britishers lecture against the evils of the Indian caste system, the vote seemed evidence that the existence of not a dissimilar system within the British science itself. At the institution's laboratories, Bose was consoled by Lord Rayleigh, who told him that he had been subjected to ceaseless attacks from chemists because, as a physicist, he had the temerity to predict that hitherto unsuspected new element would be found in air, a prediction shortly to be verified by discovery with the help of Sir William Ramsay of Argonne. The controversy of the physiologists elicited the interest of Bose's former teacher, Professor Sidney Howard Bynes, the well-known botanist and vegetable physiologist at Oxford, who called on Bose and asked if he could witness Bose's experiments. Bynes brought with him T.K. Howes, who had succeeded T.H. Huxley at the British Museum Department of Botany in South Kensington. When the men saw Bose's plant respond to a stimulus, Howes exclaimed Huxley would have given years of his life to see this experiment. As secretary of Linnean Society, he told Bose that since his paper had been refused for publication by the Royal Society, not only would the Linnean accept it, but also would invite Bose to repeat all his experiments before the physiologist, particularly his opponents. As a result of this new presentation to the Linnean Society on February 21st, 1902, Bose was able to write to his friend Tagore, "Victory, I stood there alone, ready for hosts of opponents, but in 15 minutes the hall was resounding with applause." After the paper, Professor Howes told me that he saw each experiment. He tried to get out of it by thinking of a loophole of explanation, but my next experiment closed that hole. The president of the Linnean Society wrote Bose a few days later, "It seemed to me that your experiments make it clear beyond doubt that all parts of plants, not merely those which are known to be motile, are irritable and manifest their irritability by an electrical response to stimulation. This is an important step in advance and will, I hope, be the starting point for further researches to elucidate what is the nature of the molecular condition which constitutes irritability and the nature of the molecular change induced by a stimulus. This would doubtless lead to some important generalities as the properties of matter, not only living matter, but non-living matter as well." Since ordinary plants and their different organs exhibit electrical response indicative of excitation under mechanical and other stimuli, it puzzled Bose that they gave no sign of excitement by visible movement. Unlike the mimosa leaf, which, if irritated, abruptly collapses owing to a contraction of its cushion-shaped base or pulvinus, other plants seem, at least to the eye, placidly unconcerned when scraped, burned, or otherwise interfered with. Back home in Calcutta, it suddenly hit Bose that the contraction of the mimosa was magnified by its long leaf stalk. To similarly magnify a suspected contraction in other plants, he designed a special optical lever which he was able to demonstrate visually that all the characteristics of the responses exhibited by the animal tissues were also found in those plants. Bose communicated the results of these new and extended investigations in December 1903 in a series of 7 papers to the Royal Society, which immediately planned their publication the following year in its Philosophical Transactions, a series reserved for only the most significant and momentous scientific findings. However, as the papers were being readied for the printer, underhanded intrigues and prejudicial insinuations, which had almost suppressed his Linnean Society offering, began anew, and with Bose unable to refute them from far-off India, won the day. Convinced by Bose's opponents that his theories could not be officially printed, and without waiting for the record, the Society changed its august mind and once again filed Bose's papers in its archives. To Bose, this vacillation by society only justified his decision, taken 2 years before, to no longer to rely wholly upon the acceptance of others before presenting his astonishing discoveries to the world. Although, as he put it, I thought I was much too lazy to write the books, I was forced into it. To guarantee the substance of the lectures he had given in London, Paris, and Berlin should receive the widest possible publication, Bose completed a book-length account of all his experimentation up to the middle of 1902, which published the same year under the title Response in Living and Non-Living. Herbert Spencer, the great British synthetic philosopher, very much alive to the important scientific advances of his time, despite his entry at 83 into the last year of his life, personally acknowledged Bose's volume with the regret that it was too late for him to incorporate its data into his own massive Principles of Biology. 2 years later, Professor Waller, one of Bose's most adamant opponents, quietly inserted into his new book, without even mentioning Bose's name, the Bengali assertion that any vegetable protoplasm gives electrical response. Bose then began to concentrate on determining how mechanical movements in plants might be similar to those in animals and humans. All right, and then I'll do the rest of the chapter in a part 2.